Really interesting leaked documents showed that, at least in some contexts, the U.S. government is considering socialists terrorists alongside sort of neo-Nazis. This is a very, very interesting report that I want to look at with you today from The Intercept, written by Ken Klippenstein. U.S. military training document says socialists represent terrorist ideology. A Navy training document asks, anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? We're going to look at the document in a moment. The article explains a Navy counterterrorism training document obtained exclusively by The Intercept appears to conflate socialists with terrorists and lists the left-wing ideology alongside neo-Nazis. A section of the training document subtitled Study Questions includes the following. Anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? The correct answer is political terrorists, a military source briefed on the training told me. Let's take a look at the document briefly. This is a trainee guide. It has an introduction which explains that the assignment sheet is designed to assist the student in attaining knowledge necessary to perform the duties as an assigned anti-terrorism officer. And one of the study questions is indeed the third question. Anarchists, socialists, and neo-Nazis represent which terrorist ideological category? And as Ken Klippenstein says in the article, political terrorists is the answer that is there. It's just ineffective training because whoever is directing the Navy anti-terror curriculum would rather vilify the left than actually protect anything, said the military official who spoke to Ken, who is not authorized to speak publicly, despite the fact that the most prominent threat is domestic right-wing terror. The article also notes both the FBI and Department of Homeland Security have identified white supremacists as the deadliest terror threat to the U.S. We've covered that extensively before. In October 2020, DHS issued its first annual Homeland Threat Assessment Report, stating that white supremacists were exceptionally lethal and will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland. In September, FBI Director Christopher Wray said the white supremacists have been responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last decade and that they comprise the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism portfolio. So there's definitely more here that we don't know, but I can't think of any reason that you would have neo-Nazis and socialists in the same category. Now, somebody, if I were to steel man this and come up with the best possible explanation for why they would be in the same category, and again, I don't think this is a good steel manning of it, but one could say, while you can have a neo-Nazi ideology and not go and commit terrorist acts, and you can also have a socialistic ideology and not go and commit terrorist acts, both are ideologies which, if taken to a perverted endpoint, could lead people to commit real world acts of violence. But I think it's essentially BS. Socialism, I am not a socialist. I don't believe that socializing the means of production and that saying that if one starts a business and buys all of the equipment and rents the office space and takes the legal risk and on and on and on, that as they hire employees, they should be forced to divvy up ownership of that business to everybody. Like, I just don't agree with that. I think it's okay for markets to direct resources in most cases, although there are some areas like education and healthcare, and in some senses, maybe housing, where we should take them at least partially out of the market. Or completely in some cases. Like I'm right there, with that, but I am not a socialist. I just don't see how that leads to so-called terrorism in the way that neo-Nazi ideology does. Now, I understand there's many neo-Nazis who just sort of like sit at home and they, maybe tweet stuff or post stuff, but they don't actually commit any real world acts of terror. I understand that. But I really, even in trying to defend this, as strongly as I could imagine one could, the inclusion of socialist beliefs and neo-Nazi beliefs under the same category, it doesn't make any sense to me. And so I'd be curious to hear from people in the audience. Can you come up with some way to defend this? And I'm seeing one other defense, which is kind of integrating socialist beliefs with Antifa and saying, well, Antifa does real world violence. Okay, but I think it's still a stretch, because while I think it's relatively uncontroversial to say that Antifa is not just based in anti-fascist beliefs, but heavily inspired to some degree by Marxism, including socialism on the list of terrorism seems like 5 or 6 steps forward from that. Like I did the best I could to say, what is a way that we could defend this? I can't think of one. So I want to hear from you, and we'll have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. It's not making sense to me, guys. It seems completely wacky to include neo-Nazism and socialism under the same umbrella. Let me know your thoughts. I'll follow up if I have some interesting responses. If you ever feel like you just don't have enough time to read all the books you want to read, you have to check out one of my favorite apps called Blinkist. Blinkist takes thousands of popular nonfiction books and distills each one down into an ebook or audiobook that you can get through in just 15 minutes, where you're getting all the key takeaways from the book. Just imagine how you'll be able to expand your horizons and knowledge by being able to soak up all of the important insights from 10 different books in an afternoon. Obviously, it's perfect for exposing yourself to a new book you otherwise wouldn't have time for, or you can use it to revisit a book you've already read, or use it to preview a book before you buy the full version and read it. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.